go into big events ever. I don't even go to a big church event ever when I'm in that phase of actually doing the infusions. But once that happens and I can get down to at least 10 milligrams of prednisone, and so my whole immune system isn't completely at risk, I don't have a problem going out. The other thing that I do a lot is I wash my hands. I wash my hands probably 10 times more often than the average person does. But I don't put that chemical, that everybody carries around with them. I don't put that stuff on my hands because my skin is really sensitive. So you wanted me to. So does that help you? Does that make sense?
That helped frame a lot of the that helped frame some of the conversation and everything. Because like I said, there was just so much stuff that you've been doing that just amazed me. Like I said, I've been following your accounts on LinkedIn and some of the other things that you put out there, your blog and things of that nature. And I'm sitting there like I know one of the entries you had gone traveling, and I forget where it was, but you had found like some amazing pancakes that you loved and everything. And I'm sitting there going like, she has definitely enjoyed herself because she has found some amazing pancakes. But then on the opposite side of that, I also remember reading where you had gone and basically I think you were traveling not by car, but it might have been by motorbike or something like that, and the bike just basically imploded. So you had like some sort of...
that was only about a month ago now. So
right.
let me backtrack a little bit and explain the American Wedding Project first.
All right.
So in 2007, I was asked by a friend, if you could do anything, what would you do? And I, without hesitation, and I hadn't really thought about it before, but it all just came bloating out of my mouth, was I would photograph a wedding in every state and I would teach. And then we spent the next hour talking about what it would take to get me to be a teacher. and then I ended up actually teaching photography at a tech school very soon after that, but I never got this idea out of my head. But I had all these reasons why I couldn't do it. I had a house, I had a business, I had I had all this stuff. And then in 2009, when the economy completely had crashed and the wedding industry was a complete mess, my life was a complete mess, and I was in the process of getting this sick. I just didn't know it. And all of a sudden I realized that I could. And so the Mary I Can project started. And there's a whole story behind that, and I'm not going to go into it, of how it became the Mary I Can wedding project. But and I gave away 10 photography packages across America. And I went and I did it out of my own pocket, which basically bankrupted me. And then I realized that I could not be the photographer and talk and actually document the wedding correctly. Because as a photographer in the North, photographers control the wedding. You know, we are control freak extraordinaires. You know, the photographer, it is always the photographer's fault. You know, and so most photographers who do wedding photography for an extended period of time realize that they're always going to be the person that gets blamed. So that means that we have the right to control the situation so that we don't get blamed. And so we are the ones who make sure that the bride walks down the aisle on time. You know, we are the one who fixes flowers and fixes dresses and ties girls down into those stupid laced up dresses on the back where nobody knows how to do it except for bridal consultants and wedding photographers. And you know, we're the ones who either get the bride and groom to the reception on time or they don't. You know, and in the Midwest, there's a lot of bar hopping, and so the photographer, if they are a really good photographer who hangs tight with the bride and groom, will also control how long they stay at those bars so that they get to the reception hall on time so that people don't get cold chicken. You know, so I realized when I went to New Orleans and I shot the wedding, and the reception hall person pulled me aside and said, hey, you do realize that wedding photographers here don't do like 90% of what you just did, right? And I went, no, I don't know that. And she said, yeah, no, 98% of our couples here at our hall here come from divorced families. Nobody ever does that many family pictures. They do the bridal party, they do the bride and groom, they do the pictures with just the parents and maybe the siblings, and they're done. And I'm like, oh, oops. And so I realized I changed their wedding. That wasn't the point in the first place. My point was to go out and find out how real weddings happen and how the local cultures work. So then I knew that I couldn't be the photographer, and I had to pull way back and rethink. Okay, so fast forward to now. The goal behind the American Wedding Project is to document and write about a wedding in at least every single state, and to touch as many different religions, traditions, and economic levels as possible. Because we live in a country in which we're supposed to be the melting pot of the world. Right. And yet we're the most segregated country. Our communities are so segregated, and our religions are so exclusive that we know absolutely nothing about the cultures of the people that live next door to us, which is so stupid. And weddings are one thing. Weddings, funerals, and babies are the three big things in life, right? And weddings are a happy thing, and it's something that crosses every cultural group, except for one little group of women in the Himalayas. They don't get married. You got to Google that one on your own. But every other culture throughout the world has some sort of marriage, and even people who don't have a belief in God still have a belief in wedding and still have a belief in marriage. So it crosses every section. So the goal is to create a dialogue, because there's so many fascinating little things about cultures that show up in weddings. The kola nut at a Nigerian reception. It's a huge deal. It's a huge piece of the culture. And I got to eat a piece of kola nut. Have you ever had kola nut?
I don't think so.
Oh, see, I don't even drink coffee, so I don't like coffee, the bitterness of coffee. You take that bitterness of coffee and you multiply that by about 1,000. Kola nuts are actually what Coca-Cola originally got their flavor tone from, and they have the most natural caffeine of any natural product out there. Okay, and they break open these kola nuts, and it's kind of like the Hawaiian idea with the pineapple. It's their way of welcoming everyone. And in Nigeria, if you're cramming for an exam, you don't make a pot of coffee. You cut up a kola nut, and you chew on that all night, because it's going to keep you wide awake. and I don't think I'll ever forget the look on this one elderly man's face as he watched me put this little piece of kola nut in my mouth, and he just knew. He actually got up, and he grabbed a bottle of water, and he came right over to me, because he knew that I was just going to, have the worst look on my face ever. And that I needed to wash that down as fast as I could, and I did. And the whole room right there that was near me, they were all watching me, because I kind of stood out. I don't quite have a tan that I would fit in with. I'm very much a white girl, and so there were a lot of eyes on me in that moment, and yeah, it's an acquired taste. But that's part of what this project is. It's a phenomenal tradition that they have, but most people don't ever hear about it. Most people don't even think about where did Coca-Cola come from. Much less do they think that it came from a nut from Nigeria.
Wow.
So it's those weird things, that by being there, by being at the event, that I get to see and write about, that if I wasn't physically there at the event, I wouldn't be able to share with the world, you know.
And what were some of the other unusual things that you've seen in some of the weddings that you've been to? You mentioned the thing with the cola nuts, but I'm imagining that there are probably some other things that you've seen that you were surprised by when you were watching these weddings. I know that here in Durham, a friend of mine used to work at the Carolina Theater, which is one of our large 1,000-seat theaters, and sometimes the Indian folks would have their weddings, and of course that would sometimes include the horses and the kind of things that are not used to being in the downtown area of Durham, but they did incorporate it into their wedding tradition, and I think it's part of their regular wedding tradition. But what are some of the other things that you've seen that have been a little bit different, or that you were surprised by, other than the cola nut?
Well, you brought up the Indian thing of the white horse or a white, or they're supposed to come in on a white horse or an elephant. And
right.
I just had a conversation with somebody that shared. So I did not witness this myself, but but since you brought it up, I have to share this because I thought it was ingenious. Shared a story about someone in Chicago who was having an Indian wedding, and they didn't know how to handle that piece. So he went out and he rented himself a white Mustang car.
Okay, that could fit.
He came in on a white horse. It just happened to have a lot of horsepower, not any clippity cloppeting. So there's some really creative ways of adjusting to American culture, and that's part of what this project's about, is seeing what happens. So I did a Maldavian wedding in Wisconsin, and the amount of ouzo they drank before 10 in the morning astounded me. just astounded me. I've never seen so much. Wow. Yeah. And then they had this, and then I showed up at this Orthodox Christian church, and I walked in, and I was flabbergasted by the mosaics on the walls and on the ceilings, and it was one of the most beautiful buildings I have ever been in. And I am still friends with that bride to this day. She's just wonderful. They did a crossover between their traditions and a traditional American wedding with the white dress and that, the white dress and tuxes and stuff. So that was interesting. But, actually, it was only a few weeks ago I was out in Montana, and that goes back to the motorcycle story, and I'll back up to that in a minute. But you asked what something that would happen that I wasn't expecting. The wedding was in the mountains, literally in the mountains. So we literally camped on a national forest campsite with no bathrooms. They had outhouses, and most of the people had big RVs. Their families came in from Oregon and Washington State and Montana and North Dakota and South Dakota and Colorado. And this was kind of weirdly somehow the center of all of that. And so they camped for 5 days in the mountains, and they had their wedding in a open pasture with the Rocky Mountains behind, Bull Run Mountains are in the background. And Bighorn, that's what it is. Bighorn Mountain was in the background. It was gorgeous. And they had a young man officiate over the wedding. And I think I actually looked this up because I was working on an article about this today. And you know that at this point, about 43% of all couples in America have a family member or a friend play the role of officiant.
Oh, wow.
Instead of a pastor, instead of going to a church, 43% of couples are doing that now. That is an increase of 29% since 2009, the last time that the Knot. Oh, yeah, this was from the Knot. That was the last time that the Knot had done a survey on that particular subject, and that number is increasing every year of people that are not getting married in churches but are instead doing it someplace else, hiring an officiant, or having a friend